Good day. So our topic for today is about practical analytics. This is actually a part of introduction to data analytics. So let's first discuss the objectives. So for our learning objectives, after completing this chapter, you will be able to, so number one, describe how to use slicing and dicing for analytics. Use pivot tables for manipulating data. Use sorting, filtering, ranking, and other techniques for gaining insights from the data, and discuss various slicing and dicing techniques for multiple dimensional data sources. So this will be our objectives for this lesson. So the outline will be first, we're going to have an overview of the analytics techniques. So you will see later on what are the various techniques in analytics, but we'll be focusing here on slicing and dicing. So we're going to define slicing and dicing, and then what are the slicing and dicing techniques, and common slice and dice mistakes, and what are the various tools for slicing and dicing. So we're going to have also an view of multiple dimension analysis using business object analysis, but we'll not be doing that. We'll not be having an example for that one here. And then we'll have our summary. So on your screen now is an overview of analytics techniques. So first here we have what we call the data staging. So when we say data staging, it is where we prepare the data. Data might be coming from a lot of sources, and there may be times wherein we have invalid data, we have duplicate data, or maybe the format for the data is different from what we're going to use. So we have to convert a data, etc. So this has something to do with data staging. And here are several analytics techniques. But what we'll be focusing here will be about slicing and dicing. So once we're able to manipulate our data, analyze our data, then we can actually publish the result. So more or less, these are the analytic techniques. So let's now define slicing and dicing. So multiple dimensional data are examined from many angles. So you have to manipulate data in many angles. And then larger data sets filtered down to areas of interest. As I've said a while ago, the data will be coming from a lot of sources, and it might become a very big data set. That's why usually data analytics is also called big data analytics. Okay? So large data set filtered down to areas of interest. So what we're going to do with large data is we're going to filter it down. We're going to uh, remove, or let's say hide some of the records. So that what we can view will be only the areas of interest. So trends and outliers identified via sorting. So we can sort. We'll be seeing, or we'll be having example of sorting later on. Slicing is a way to filter a large data set to smaller data sets of interest. So again, we have a big data, we have a large data, so we can slice it into a smaller data set. Then dicing the sliced data set creates an even more granularly defined data set. So we want to make it even smaller then we actually call that dicing. So we're going to have here an example. So let's say we have here a data containing the customer, the material, and the revenue. So let's say we have a large data set. Okay. Now on the next slide, we're going to slice the data by product. That's why we're going to show only coming from Deluxe Touring Bike Black. So you notice only this type of bike is shown now on our data set. So we actually slice our data set into a smaller data set. So we call that slicing. So again, look at the materials, only this type of bike will be shown on our data. So that's slicing. And then, so from this, we would like to see from only from Big Apple bikes and DC bikes as our customer. So we further made our data into even a smaller data set. So we call that dicing. Okay, so that's dicing. Here are still some of the slice and dice techniques. One is sorting. So when we sort, we actually arrange the data maybe in ascending order, descending order, alphabetical order, numerical order, chronological order, etc. Okay, we can also have nested sorting. That means we're going to sort with several keys. And we can also filter. So filter by label for textual fields. Example, just like in our example a while ago, customer Big Apple bag. So we filtered our data using Big Apple bags. Or we can also filter using numeric values. So let's say revenue is greater than 1 million. We can also get rank. Okay, so maybe top 10, top percent, etc. We can also aggregate data. When we say aggregation, we can get the sum, the average, the minimum or the lowest, max or highest, or we can count record set. And we can also do calculation by adding fields, etc. So these are still some of the slice and dice techniques. So let's take a look at some of the examples here. So here we have the company code, US, sales organization, and then we have number of employees, 400 and 300 for this sales organization. So we can add them. The result is 700. So that is sum. So that's why here we have an aggregate, or we have the sum of these two number of employees. Now we can still expand this one. So if we expand this, you notice for UE00, so we have 320 and 400, then 200, and then 300. I don't know how they were able to get 700 here. So add, because there is an exception. So there's exception aggregations actually. So we included only 2014. So we call that exception aggregation. So we try to filter the aggregation. Okay. So here, how suggested aggregation method. So for revenue, we can use sum or average. For profit, the same, sum or average. Quantity sold, sum or average. Quantity on hand, okay, we can have maybe the average quantity on hand, or maybe none, or we can have the highest or the lowest. For labor hours, maybe sum or average. Number of employees at a point in time, so we can use mean, max, average for None. Number of delivery tracks at point in time, min, max, average, or none. Time of completion, the minimum, the highest, average, or none. Processing time, also minimum, maximum, average, or none. Asset age, average, or none. Of course, we don't get the sum of ages. So maybe we can get the average. So we have here again slice and dice techniques about drill down and roll up. So you notice in this example, uh, we have here data set, and this data belongs to the country Germany. So the region, city, etc. And this lower part belongs to United States. Now we can actually roll this up. So by compressing this, and the result will be something like this. So what we have here is just the aggregate value for the sum for all Germany, and it will not show the details. So we call that roll up. So from roll up, if you want to show the details, we call that drill down. So drill down to show details and roll up to hide the details. So what we have here is another slice and dice techniques we call queries. So there are some applications wherein we can have what we call the query by example. So as an example or a software that we can use here is this one, DX Query Designer. I will not be discussing more of this because what we'll be using later on will be Microsoft Excel, and this feature is not included in Microsoft Excel, but this one is included. A query by example is included in Microsoft Access. Then we also have conditional formatting. So you can use formatting so that more or less visually we can have some sort of an idea of the values. It's like, for example, here green. You can see green. That means it is upwards, etc. And yeah, here also we can more or less view some sort of a chart, but it's just using conditional formatting. What are the common slice and dice mistakes? So here are examples. We can be wrong in incorrect aggregation. Let's say, for example, we're adding together ending inventories from each month. I don't think that's a uh, logical way of having a result. Or here, adding apples and oranges such as different currencies. So if they're different currencies, then that's incorrect aggregation. Treating null as zero. Uh, be careful with this because let's say, for example, in Excel, blank fields are actually not included in the average. If you use average or count, the blank fields are not included. That's why if you notice here, if you're going to get the average, it's actually 79. But if you place zeros here and you're going to get the average, you notice there's a difference in the value because zeros are now included in the average. Okay. So some also errors may be errors in data acquisition. So let's say there's something wrong with our in acquiring our data, then of course, even we have the correct formula, probably we'll be having an erroneous result. As they say in the field of IT, garbage in, then garbage out. And also we can have errors in calculation. So we created our own formula. Unfortunately, maybe there's something wrong with our formula. So that can be also a mistake. Here are some tools that we can use for slicing and dicing. So we can basically use Microsoft Excel, especially in tables and pivot tables, IBM, SAP, etc. So these are some of the tools. There are actually a lot of tools that we can use for data analytics. But for our example, of course, we'll be using Microsoft Excel because most of us already have this software. Then the pivot table. What's a pivot table? A pivot table creates what is called a cross-tabulated structure or cross-tab. It's a cross-tab. A cross-tab displays aggregated and summarized data based on which way you sort the columns and rows. So we can have different rows and columns. We can have several columns, several rows, and based on that, the data here will be shown, which is actually a summarized data or aggregated data. And we'll be showing that later in the second part of this video. So aside from the table, we can also show pivot charts. Of course, sometimes it is necessary to show the data using charts. And maybe we are familiar with right brainers and left brainers. And we know that right brainers actually prefer uh, images or charts rather than values. So it is always better to present your data in several ways or your output in several ways, maybe both values or text and charts. Another tool is actually the Microsoft Power Pivot, very similar to Microsoft Excel, but since this one is really dedicated to creating pivot tables, then it is quite even more powerful than Microsoft Excel's pivot tables. So, as a summary, slicing and dicing is the manipulation of data to be able to see it from many different angles. So, we can filter data so that we can see it in many different angles. We can slice and dice using various techniques such as sorting. So, with sorting again, we can arrange filtering. So, we can show only those that satisfies a particular criterion. We can rank and so on. So be careful when you slice and dice so as not to mislead. So of course take note of the errors in slicing and dicing, like giving the wrong aggregation or aggregating values or adding values with uh, different currencies, let's for example, and then reports. So we can create reports including crosstabs and charts are created from sliced and diced data. And although we'll be using Excel, there are many software tools for slicing and dicing. Business objects analysis, edition for Office provides powerful multi-dimensional slicing, dicing, pivoting, sorting, filtering, charting, and highlighting are some of the important features of analysis. So that ends this video. Thank you.